In London, troops had simply killed those who complained about being hungry, saved them the pain of dying the slow way. Sometimes they let the kids live, but that was hardly some act of mercy. The kids didn't think twice about killing other wretched Londoners for scraps. The initial food shortage was solved by just turning it into a shortage of mouths to feed. What was left ended up on the dreadnoughts, keeping us respectable folk alive to reach the jagged pit that was New London. Not that all of us made it, or survived to see the sunrise on our second day. Didn't even feel like a second day to most, since we'd been up all night salvaging materials and fixing any buildings still standing. But the hunger, that was our reminder. People didn't say anything about it. The London massacres had trained us all well. Some of us hadn't eaten since the first day out of the dreadnought. I had, obviously. The reward for surviving a second day here then was to be a slab of steamed mystery meat from the old research base's abandoned larder. It wasn't pork, nor beef, nor bacon, that much was clear. Had this young lady named Effia who told me she already knew how to cook that kind of meat, and volunteered to run our newly built steam oven. She was West African, the only such person on any dreadnought most likely. She was only here because she'd been adopted by a late naval officer, with whom I had distant acquaintance, the widow of whom was a favourite of Lord Gloucester. Anyway, I believed Effia's claim, having been in Africa for long enough to know the sorts of things the Empire occasionally required of those people. Of course, we'd be keeping God awake without good reason if there was no food for the days to come. People had been putting off thinking about that, but I brought their spirits up a little with a reminder that folk had been living here on the frozen coast since time immemorial. A few had even heard of these Arctic tribes I was thinking of. No sign of them here anymore, but no use thinking about that. Point was, there was something to eat out there, so our 15 strongest were sent up the lift to start looking. We'd seen the odd fox, seal, and even a couple of bears on the way here. Had a few game enthusiasts on the team, who fashioned all manner of traps and lures to scatter around the top of the crater. It was very primal, I must say. The apprehension we felt there, placing our survival in the hands of the hunters, must have been the daily mood for our species for thousands of years before God civilized us. It made one think of the Great Flood, the death of sinners that reset the world. Now God's will was the Great Frost, and we were here building our ark, just a little too late. If being hungry or hopeless is a sin, then we've been doing God's work admirably. The rest of us spent the day piling up materials around the heat tower, except for Six Eyes, who was holed up in the lab with a few university types, trying to fix this big electric lamp. It was a beacon of sorts, a lighthouse that we could float with a Barlow balloon like an airship. The thinking there was inspired by the continued absence of the rest of the crew, a fact that clawed at the minds of those who had family and friends among the missing. What manner of person lets their family be split from them anyway? Well, it was the manner of person we had, and I caught a few scheming to use the lift and go searching. The beacon project set them back in line, and saved their lives, no doubt. On the second night, we assessed all the timber and canvas we'd collected, and started work on a crescent of tents around the tower. We'd earned a sleep, so long as everyone promised to wake up again. Also set up a new tent for Doc Painsworth, since more and more people were too weak to work, and needed constant pampering to avoid losing feet to the frost. Didn't have space in the tents for everyone, so I ordered the men to bed down under the tower, myself included. The tower had been chugging away all day, compressing steam in its main chamber, and let me tell you, this mad machine worked better than any had hoped. The lab, for example, was practically a greenhouse now, with the steam pipes cooking the radiator units nicely, and busily spinning the electric turbine in the cellar. Effia emerged from the mess hall with her viney hair uncovered, and rightly so. The tower's exterior had grown so hot from its labours that it was like a radiator to the whole earth. To see icy scraps of steel quivering in the wind a stone's throw away, while around the tower the snow melted right off your rapidly intolerable coat, was quite surreal. Perhaps God didn't want us to have our little ark here, but by the grace of mere mortals, here we were. It was, by standard measure, a ghastly situation for us all. Yet, with food warming us from within and our mechanical powerhouse from without, there was cause for comfort as we finally took rest on that second night. At dawn, our hunting party rushed off to see what their traps had for us. Not much. Not enough by a long shot. Bits and pieces, really. Mostly birds and small mammals, and something that looked like a young elk. Only way to get anything reasonable out of this haul was to throw anything vaguely edible, bones and all, into a soup, and brew it all day until even the sick could stomach it. Even Effia wasn't quite sure how to do this, but one fellow, Ross, had his share of experience with poorhouses. You see, all of us there were what they called well-to-do. Soup wasn't food to them, and they made sure I knew it all day. They wanted real food. Suppose we could have drawn lots and shot the losers. That would have done it. But unfortunately I was planning to keep these people alive, so it was a tin of lumpy hot water, breakfast, lunch and dinner. And for those ill-inclined for this, the new London special, i.e. plain hot water. The day was spent trying to set up more traps and turning more wreckage into makeshift tents. Progress was made with both, but of course not enough. I didn't ask people to work through the night, but some did anyway. I was feeding these people like the poor, and they knew well how the poor were to properly conduct themselves. With hands firmly gripped on their bootstraps, they pulled. It was 3:30 AM when I was awoken from my new frigid accommodation to witness Six Eyes and Company's new marvel. They had a Barlow balloon fully inflated, with a huge rotating lantern hanging underneath it. Using a long electrical cable as the mooring, it was gradually raised to float above our crater. The light was brilliant, like a lighthouse indeed. It was visible for a good 20 miles, even through the snow. Within minutes it had worked its magic. The cable hanging from the balloon doubled as a radiograph receiver, and as soon as Six Eyes and I scanned about with the decoder in the lab, there were two distinct signals. One was the messageless pulse of the Dreadnought's positioner in the west, and another came from the northeast, printing out "Calling New London" via the attached typewriter. The signal was weak and ceased after a few minutes. Given they knew the name of our little poorhouse on ice, it could only have been the rest of our crew. We'd need to take our portable radiography transmitter up to the top of the glacier to make a reply, but I planned to go one step further. As everyone gathered in the mess hall for the morning brew, I looked for 5 volunteers to go walk the Frostlands and find our crew in person. Something struck me as I walked around the benches. Everyone had their coats and hats off in the warmth of the hall, and you could see how little was left of them underneath. Had a quiet word with Ross and Effia at the counter. Sounded like more people were getting the new London special than I thought. When you're shivering all day, one missed meal does the work of 5. Some of the crew had been carried into the mess hall that morning and couldn't stand up anymore. They were starving to death right before my eyes. An expedition could wait. We were closer to the edge than I'd thought, and few had the energy to claw us back. I looked around the room and saw a single pair of eyes looking back. Captain Blacknell, a rugged old marine who'd lived through worse. I went over to him and asked, "Captain, what's your assessment of the hunt? Are things to improve?" "Luck of the draw, isn't it, Captain?" he replied. "We've put out a few more snares, taken a look around. Bears in those hollows we spotted on the way in. Not that any of that matters anymore, does it?" "Well, of course it matters," I said. Blacknell finished his water in one gulp and slammed the tin on the table. "Oh, only for you, Captain. If we have a bear hauled down that lift, you'd eat well, wouldn't you? This is going well for you, isn't it?" I was taken aback. It was the first vocal signs of dissent, and Chalk was on his back in the sick tent. "We share this struggle," I said after too long thinking. "Thanks to you," Blacknell said. Noises from the others egged him on. "We trusted you when you said to be out there all night bringing the stuff in. We thought it'd be for our own good. And what's all this we see today and yesterday? Giving stuff to Six so he can make his big balloon, while we're not even eating. What's all this? We're not even eating, Captain, and you're going around telling us what you heard on the radiogram. Hodges is dying, and by noon he'll have plenty of mates there in that corner. It could have been very different, couldn't it? We could have been focusing on staying alive.
That's what everyone out there is doing. They aren't thinking about us, are they? You talk to me as if our traps are the problem. Not at all. It's your leadership that's the problem.
I stood and endured this tirade, and the chorus of weaker tirades that came in its wake. I thought some might be willing to stand up for me, but standing up was a tall order on the stomachs we had. You must understand that I had no idea how little those traps would yield, and indeed was only giving Six Eyes his parts for the balloon at the behest of those calling for their missing families to be recovered. I explained that to them, but reason has no place among the starving, as I well knew. All I could do was promise that today would be better, and state without any reason to believe it that the rest of the crew had the sleds with our food reserves from the dreadnought, so relief was soon at hand. With the hall remaining quiet after my defence, I took my leave to see about delivering on my bluster. It felt different outside though. I hurried to put my coat on, feeling the chills even that close to the heat tower. The much berated Six Eyes had readings from the beacon to explain it. New weather front had rolled in, clear skies, and strong winds from the ice sheet in the northwest. The thermometers were bottomed out, but he estimated it was -40 up there, with no signs of improvement. The cold killed a few animals in sight of our traps, but even then our boys could only scrounge half a day's meat, with a few catching a debilitating chill in the process. It was the coldest any of us had ever known, as we skimmed the surface of starvation on our 4th day of refuge. As I'm sure you're well aware, these were the times people mean nowadays when they say, back when it was warm.